Hello, everybody. I'm Adam Chirinis. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. The topic, I think, as you know, is influence marketing, or also known as influencer marketing. And what we're going to talk about today is how healthcare B2B marketers, companies probably like yourselves who are selling software or services to healthcare systems, how you can take advantage of influencer marketing. So we've got four learning objectives today. First of all, what is influence marketing and why it's so important? What makes influence marketing different B2B to B2C? So you probably heard of influencer marketing in the B2C space. It's kind of where it's best known, but it actually can have an even greater impact in B2B. So that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to share some examples and going to give you some actionable ideas on how you can leverage influencer marketing and what you should start with. So just a little bit to set the table here about why it is that we're talking about influencer marketing. And I'd just like to ask my fellow panelists, Robbie, Delphine and Steve, just turn your videos on so you'll get you to join the video. Sorry, I should have told you that a little sooner. Hey, we'll do intros in a second. So what you're seeing here on the screen is the typical B2B buyer journey. This actually comes from a presentation I think Demandbase did. It's used in ABM strategy, and so this is the kind of typical journey that a VP of applications or a head of telehealth or a head of language services, typical journey that somebody like this would be on if they're looking to buy software and services. So they'll start off and they'll do some initial research. They'll tap into their social network for advice. They'll search a bit on social media. They'll research across competitor sites. They'll look at your website. They'll report back to the buying committee, and then eventually they'll put their hand up and start engaging with you and then get into your pipeline. And so, what we're all trying to do in B2B and ABM marketing is to get people earlier in the process. We want them to be able to reach out to us here, or at least become more aware of us. And so we're going to talk today about this phase of the buyer journey. Basically, what we can do with influencers to help raise awareness and consideration and potentially engagement of prospective buyers with you earlier on in the process. And the reason why I wanted to do this session is for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's something I've been aware of for a long time, and I really have a lot of heart for it. The second thing is that from what I can tell, very few healthcare technology and services firms are doing influencer marketing in a meaningful way. So for you as a marketer, this is a potential for you to really differentiate from your competitors. So with that, I'd like to introduce panelists, and they come from a company that they'll introduce called Inpulsus. And Inpulsus specializes in influencer marketing. And so they provide influencer marketing services for companies globally, for everything from Fortune 500 companies to sort of early stage startups, venture-backed startups. And they're doing some really interesting work. And there are a bunch of folks I've known through my career for many years. So I can't speak highly enough of them. They're great folks. So with that, what I'll do is actually have Delphine, Steve, and then Robbie introduce yourself, and then we're going to hand over to Inpulsus guys to actually make the presentation.
I should start then, maybe.
Please do.
Yes, I'm Delphine. I'm based in Paris, but I was in London for 20 years. And I've been a marketer for the last 22 years, also a fundraiser in charity. But I quickly moved basically from events to online communities and started in influence marketing before the expression was coined. And we were speaking about relationship marketing, worked for Courvoisier, the Cognac House, and then joined Tracker one of the leading influencer relationship management platform as EMEA marketing director, then VP of influence, where I basically helped develop the global strategy, but also theorize to help define the category of influence marketing. I've worked for small scale business, large scale business, and with Robbie for quite a while now, 8 years, I think, and Stephen, quite a few as well. So that's me. And I'm the CSO of Inpulsus. I lead on the strategy side.
Thanks, Delphine. Stephen Spesny here. Great to speak to everybody. Hope to speak further after the webinar here. As Adam mentioned, Adam, myself, and Robbie go way back to working in consulting in the first wave of the web back in our time with a company called Viant. I was in San Francisco during the kind of belly of the beast, building websites early on. My recent track has really been agency and services side ever since then, particularly working as a fractional CMO, particularly for B2B companies. And part of that job is to look at and assess the channel tools that we can use to gain and see and convert customers into the B2B offerings that you might have. For me, influence marketing is a wonderful, not just tactical, trigger, but a real strategic difference now, difference maker in how you go about engaging the market. And you'll see, hopefully, in our presentation why it's that important.
It helps to unmute. You would have thought I'd have been caught that after doing this stuff for 10 years now, right? Hi, I'm Robbie Van Adibay. Today I'm sitting in London. I sit in various other places at various other times. So I brought the Inpulsus gang together. I'm CEO of the business. And essentially the thing that brought Inpulsus about was my long-standing involvement with a company that Delph mentioned, Tracker. So Tracker was one of the first influence relationship management platforms on the market. I was the executive chairman for many years and helped define the product, the company, how we went to market, and like Delph was very involved in the definition of how one actually does influence marketing. And we basically, one of the things that we found at Tracker was whenever there was a situation where a client struggled with influence as a process and, sometimes would blame the tool, when we picked apart what was really going on, what we often found was that they weren't doing influence marketing properly. And so, we created a services organization in Tracker, but it was just to teach people how to use the tool. What was missing in the market was an organization to help people do influence marketing. There are a lot of firms out there, agencies who will execute campaigns on your behalf. But, our belief is that influence marketing as a marketing technique is so important that it's actually not something that you would leave to an external agency to do. It's something that organizations have to control and ideally execute themselves. Without a doubt, you often use organizations to help you with those processes, but the ownership must lie with an organization because these relationships are potentially critical to the future of the business. And so the notion that a third party would own those things, we think is incorrect. So Inpulsus was created to help organizations create their own influence marketing processes. The team that we have at the firm is spread all over the world. We've got decades of experience between us doing this stuff. And we're going to tell you a little bit about how we do the work that we do and give you some examples of some of the projects that we've done for different firms out there. So first off, why don't we just try and define what this influence stuff is? It's, who said it the other day? It's like pornography. I know when I see it, right? The most common examples I think that most of us are familiar with are those in the B2C world. Many of you will see things from the community of folks out there doing this stuff. And I think what we'll do is give you a couple of examples of folks who practice this most effectively. Stephen?
Sure. So again, as consumers on the B2C side, we probably have good examples of our own experiences with influencer marketing. And we put the R in the parentheses here to talk about influence as being enabled by influencers. It's both. What is it? In the B2C world, this idea of sponsors, of those talking about products or services that they believe in to their communities, to their audiences, is the act of influence. And I'm picking two examples here. One, very, very high profile, Khloe Kardashian of the Kardashian clan, who's done really quite an amazing job of the last 10 years of social media to build a business that is on their terms, multiple products, multiple services, endorsements, where this is just a snapshot of Instagram, 239 million followers. Her audience looks to her to say what is good, what is interesting, what they care about. Another example here on the consumer side is a much smaller influencer, but still very relevant to what we get to, which are niche topics, niche audiences. This is Caroline Gleick. I follow her. She's an alpinist and a mountaineer out of Utah. She works with a bunch of outdoor companies, Patagonia, Gleick, a couple other companies as well. And she's also directly tied to very strong activist causes on climate change and conservation. So again, this idea, and you see the quote here, that a lot of the activity now in the B2C world that is first in that channel into purchase, into consideration, begins with influence, begins with an audience of your peers where you're looking to see what those peers are doing, what they're saying, what they're excited about. That's influence marketing. It used to be called word of mouth marketing 10 years ago. But with the growth of social media and the depth of social media, it's really become the phrase to think about. So what is it? Simple explanation, hopefully you see here. Leveraging a network effect of trusted experts via social media, right? To give businesses this idea of greater exposure, greater awareness, greater engagement with the business, and obviously impact to the business on traditional metrics like revenue, like share of voice, so forth. And the last sentence here is really hopefully a simple way to look at it, which is how can you as a business enable others to market for you? It can be done efficiently. And for B2B, this is really the secret sauce that we've begun to see as being a wonderful way to move the business forward. Delph, maybe answer the question now, why influence marketing? Why does it work?
Yes, I think it's very much because today people don't trust what brands and enterprise say they are. They actually trust other people. It's always been the case that people trust people around them, but obviously with the advent of social media, this has really kind of democratized and got bigger and bigger. And that's kind of where it starts. So how do you do to join that conversation, right? The second point, it's PPC, right? So for many years, companies kind of gain leads, gain new clients and prospects with advertising. The reality is advertising has become more and more expensive and less impactful because simply people don't really trust advertising. Even you, when you do a search on Google, you tend to pass all the ads to kind of finally get to the organic company or article ranking first. So it's very much that trust that people have in other people's recommendation, and why when PPC worked really well 10 years ago, it's less and less efficient in terms of money, but also in terms of results.
So, a perfect example of this process at work is a company that I think most of us might, unless you've been under a rock, you've heard of Tesla, right? So the growth of that company has been spectacular. Last quarter, they did 18 billion plus in revenue. And that's from sort of a standing start 18 years ago. One of the fascinating things about that business is if you go to Google and type Tesla, you won't find any clickable keywords or anything. Tesla have never bought a pay-per-click ad or any kind of digital advertising in the life of that company. So how is it that you've heard of them? You've heard about them because they do influence marketing, right? They don't call it that, but there is an organization within the company that is dedicated to executing influence marketing type processes. And what this means for Tesla is that a typical global car company spends between 4 and 8% of revenue, not profits, revenue on marketing. So, in the case of a firm like Toyota, which is 100 billion plus in revenue, that's a lot of money being spent on marketing, advertising, digital advertising, right? If you type in Toyota, you will see a lot of clickable ads above their name. Tesla don't need to spend any of that money. Their marketing budget, I believe, last year was about 50 million US. So incredible efficiencies. And it's clear that it works. The Model Y launch was one of the most successful car launches ever. The number of pre-orders for that car, which came about from an influence marketing based exercises, were I think the most of any new car launch ever before. So as a process, it works. So then the question is, well, Tesla is clearly a B2C type brand. What about the B2B realm? And the reality is that it works in B2B categories as well. It's the same process, big picture. The specific details end up being very different, right? So in the B2B world, what you're doing is interacting with important individuals, with influential individuals, to have them essentially do what we were talking about in the B2C world, which is carry your message to the market for you with their credibility and their insight leading that exercise.
So how is influence marketing different in kind of B2B and B2C? Straightforward. In B2B, it's less transactional, and therefore it's more transparent because there's no exchange of money. It's more complex as well, and it's to be approached strategically, simply because the people you are dealing with will be certainly there for quite a long time. And you don't want to kind of miss your approach. You don't want to do the wrong thing because then you alienate them and it'll be really hard to bring them back. So it needs to be approached strategically. It's also generally a long-term strategy based on developing this relationship. And it's about building trust and providing mutual value. Because these B2B influencers are generally recognized as thought leaders or subject matter experts by their peers and audience. They tend to have a job, and being market aware of what's happening is on that market is actually part of their job. It's the authority that they have on their audience. Generally, it's content which is much more text-based. It's sharing insight, opinions, news, just judgments. And generally, we're not speaking the Kardashian kind of clan. It's much more niche. It can be a very small number of followers, but really high level people. So it's really about peer influence.
So let's get to some meat on the bone. Examples are the best way. This is one of our clients out of the UK. Upside is the company. They are a tech company coming out of startup into scale-up mode. You see the description of what they do. They're in the financial services market. They've built a platform that connects through open banking to allow retailers and merchants to see specific details about consumer spend. The goal being to build loyalty programs at much greater speed, at much greater detail, and hopefully at much greater impact to both the consumer, who's going to get cash back, that's part of their story, but also to the business that's going to be able to drive, greater loyalty, greater returning purchases, and so forth. If you went out and tried to buy keywords and ads through a performance media campaign around loyalty, around cashback, particularly around open banking, it's quite expensive. So for a firm that's in this startup to scale up mode, basically fairly small, what do you do to get awareness? What do you do to launch them? And you can see the 3 bullets here on objectives. The goal then was they needed to engage a B2B audience that was specifically tied to telling the story in these retailers and merchants at quite a high level, senior to CXOs. Hey, this is why we're here. This is the problem we're trying to solve. We think it's your problem too. Let's have a conversation. And it got very specific very quickly. Part of the goal too was to begin to kind of, use the flywheel about getting first customers to also become influencers. So this is standard stuff. This is customer testimonials and case studies. But again, to bring it to a new kind of level of engagement where a customer champion program is really part of the influence model. So that's upside. Let us show you what we did in terms of process, but also some excerpts on actual work and deliverables. And again, as Adam set up, we'll show you some recommendations coming out of this. This was about a 6-month effort. There are things that you can do yourselves that are completely tied to the same things you'll see here, but at a smaller scale, depending on where you are. So what do we do? We're consultants at heart. There is a process. As you know, marketing can be expensive. It can be complex. So do a little planning up front. And really, there are 4 steps here, and they're sequential. Think of it more really as a journey forward, as opposed to a circular iterative motion. We really want to get baseline kind of principles set first. And that first step is benchmark and listening. And you can see the 2 bullets here. What we do to understand who the influencers are that we might want to engage is listen. Let's listen to the market and find out who's talking about the themes that we care about as a business. We're in X segment, in X market. What are the things we care about? And let's drill in, let's tunnel in to what we hear and see. That's the first step of listening. We also then look at this idea of a inside out, which is what do we want to say? That's our own proactive efforts. And what do those things reveal as well? So it's outside in, what's happening in our market, and inside out, which is what do we want to say? With that triangulation, we can find a series of influencers that might be best fit for the business. That's step 1. Step 2 is we're going to build a strategy against that. And confluence is Delphine's term for content plus influence. Pretty straightforward, but a really important pairing of 2 ideas, which is influencers need content in order for them to engage. They want to be excited about something. They want to push it to their audience. What is the content that you have that could serve that goal, right? As good marketers, you most likely have a content strategy, so it's already there, but let's put it through the filter of influence. That gives us influencers to go out and target and say hello to and do outreach. So this idea of an onboarding activation is step 3. This is hands-on. This is the other kind of gap that we see with influence. Influence is an always-on relationship. It's something you say yes to, but it's not a campaign that you turn it on and off. These are real people, as Delphine said. They've got relevant, interesting, and probably impactful jobs themselves in your industry or your adjacent industry. So we have to manage a relationship. In fact, the world of CRM, as we know quite well, there's a world of IRM now, and that's where these tool sets sit: influencer relationship management. The last step is once we're live, we've activated, we're moving them to use our content, to use our ideas, to talk to their audiences. Like any good marketing channel, we're going to measure and optimize. And wonderfully, there's a whole series of tool sets out there, from large enterprise tools to kind of middle tier tools to free tools that help us do that job. We can see what they're doing inside the platforms. We can look inside LinkedIn, who's talking about us the most, who's getting the most engagement, What is the mixture of platforms between LinkedIn to Reddit to YouTube? And we want to then optimize who's doing the best job that we think. So that's the process. And for upside, what did that look like? Benchmark and social listening. Again, what we did was we built a competitive set of that company to their competitors. They predefined this for us. And we used a tool called Brandwatch. There are many tools like this. There's Talkwalker, there's Meltwater. There's a whole range of tools that, given the right queries, the right kind of questions to ask, it can come back with what does it see and hear. In this case, we're looking for probably what you would know from traditional advertising, but a wonderful digital metric now is called share of voice. So it was a competitive set. You can kind of see there on the graphic of 6 companies, Upside being one of them. Who was getting the most share of voice, the most conversation across all online sources? Websites, corporate websites and news sites, all public forums, trade magazines, publications, as well as Twitter. Twitter is a public feed. It's visible through the web. Now we add to that private feeds. What do you see in LinkedIn? What might you see in Facebook, Instagram, YouTube that might be relevant as well? But again, we're out there listening for what we can find are the conversations around brands, as well as, guess what? The themes. So here's the second slide here. You might recognize this. We call it a topic wheel. You can see word clouds. Probably see that in SEO analysis sometimes. These are the themes that competitive set was most focused on in terms of conversation. Really interesting dynamic. And from that, you can see the circle. We see volume, we see activity over time, we see channel mixture, and most importantly, as you see the 2 insets here, we begin to see who is talking about the things that matter to Upside, right? Was it about the fintech world? What is about transformation for, let's say, a CIO at a big retailer? Was it more broadly around innovation for fintech as well? Open banking being part of that.
Hey, Stephen, sorry, chime in. A couple of questions came through. One I actually want to leave to the end because it's a good, very meaty question, but one which I think is probably needs to be answered right now, which is, do these listening tools address LinkedIn?
Some do. It's a great question. LinkedIn is basically a closed API. It's difficult to get information outside of LinkedIn if you're not inside LinkedIn, if that makes sense. So the first place of defense is to go to LinkedIn and get that information as best you can yourself through your company account. But yes, there are tools now, and LinkedIn is getting a little bit nicer about allowing these tools to tunnel in and get that information. There's a public view to LinkedIn, public profiles, right? So some of these tools do answer those questions. But again, it's somewhere between public and private right now, as opposed to any website that's visible, in front of the registration, in front of the paywall, let's say. Those are completely public.
Could you just name maybe 1 or 2 of those tools?
Sure. I mean, there's there's tools called Tagger. There's public tools around Social Vibe, and there's another one called what was the one, Delph, that we used for Cotswold? SoTrender, SoTrender. So there's a whole stack of tools. Again, large enterprise that you got to pay for, to these middle to lower tier tools that are free to use, right? It's confusing, and it's a great question. There's a lot of options out there, and the question is really what you want to look at. The private networks, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, generally have pretty good tools themselves. So start with what you could have access to within the network, and then go outside for the public tools where appropriate.
And if I may, for B2B in particular, if you're an influencer on LinkedIn, generally these people have been building their audience for quite a long time. So you tend to find them also through Twitter, which is still kind of an important network for B2B.
Great. Yeah, I'm looking at the question now. Thanks, Lee. Good question. So again, this idea of let's uncover the themes that are important to the business, which uncover activity, mentions, and now covers, guess what? Authors. So I'll hand over to you, Delph.
Yeah, so that's kind of where we start working on the strategy together with a client, right? Where we do basically brainstorm workshops, where we look at the different type of content that we can work with influencers that take us further, obviously their own content strategy, and we highlight the kind of content strategy that should be aligned with the influencers. So that's kind of one of the, and we start seeing the influencer archetype that's coming from the earlier stage, where we kind of build a big pool of influencers to see who's driving the conversation on which channel, which formats. So it's very much feeding into that work that we do on the content side, and then on the influencer side, maybe the next step, the next slide, Stephen. Where we kind of define archetypes, right? These archetypes are, we're looking at different type of individual that we can group to help manage that generally approach the topic with the same angle. The idea with these archetypes is really to identify the different categories of individuals that impact the conversation, and generally they come at it from a different angle. So for Upside, we identified about 6 really high impact kind of archetypes, from the high street expert to the retail techies, the analyst, the change agent, people within companies at high level, changing things from the inside. And we kind of know they want to be approached for the same kind of thing, the same kind of engagement opportunities should be brought to them. The way to generate mutual benefit for them is more or less similar, the channel they're active on. So that's kind of really where we link up the content strategy and the influence strategy. So yes, I've discussed it a little bit. This is like further down into one archetype. Obviously for Upside, we wanted to tap onto the retail merchant and the high street experts in terms of footfall and which trends bring a very interesting conversation to them. Then we kind of move on to onboarding and activation. That's kind of where we develop the plan. Sometimes it's a launch plan like we did for Upside. We kind of draft the kind of approach to orchestrate things properly and really make sure that the influencer we approach, the approach is personalized. We know who we are talking to before approaching them, right? It's really about knowing who these people are. And we kind of plan a little welcome pack, whatever that is, where we know there's good chances they're going to say yes to speak further to us. Then obviously we look at measurement and optimization. So we kind of build a measurement dashboard to make sure we're looking at KPIs that are being impacted and how they're being impacted. So we build a dashboard with our client, but also we kind of build on the workflow for the marketing operations. So the team know what they need to do, and the person, the influence marketing manager, for example, if there's one, what they need to do and what the person above should be doing as well, to kind of make sure we build on that always on program where we interact on a regular basis with our influencers.
And the output of this then, let's get to, again, to meat on the bone. So for Upside, part of that broad program, the very first activation, we call them activations, call it a campaign if you wish. The very first piece was a co-authored white paper with a series of selected influencers. So we all know white papers as a content asset that can be very valuable in the process of, again, of consideration, of research and so forth. But let's take that asset kind of model into influence. What does that really mean? Well, it just means what it says. We actually asked, as part of our outreach to these influencers, we are writing a paper on X. It's about the value of loyalty and what are the tipping points within that. How much do people buy, need to buy, what type of products, over what time frame, a whole range of data that Upside has in their platform. And we gave those topics to influencers, said, hey, we want to write something with you. What are you interested in this data? What do you think would be insightful? What could be exclusively shared with your audience that you would be interested in? And this is the output. And you can find this live. It's quite a rich, deep white paper in terms of data. But it's been co-authored with influencers. And you can see some of the select ones here. These aren't kind of ad hoc, fairly small niche community. We've got CMOs, we've got the head of the retail practice at KPMG Europe. So it's both customer targets, but it's also those other archetypes that Delphine talked about. What are the other places in your ecosystem that could help you, again, as a brand, as a product or service in B2B, get your story out and get it out with authenticity? Because what we're after is the eyeballs, the audiences of these influencers. So that's the first tactical activation. There's a long campaign of other things that included a different type of ebook. There was a series of interviews, and of course, like this, a webinar as well. But this was the very first piece that we launched with them coming out of the program. And here's results to the beginning of this year, just one single asset. And you can see here, we're really driving within a sales funnel. We're getting MQLs for them to sell against. The ROI here was around 15x against the commitment of the program. And I'll hopefully answer the question everybody's asking. None of these influencers were paid. This is not PR. This is not B2C where we're giving, a product placement bonus for somebody to say nice things. This was all value for value. Hey, we're Upside. We have a unique perspective on the market. We want you with your unique perspective to take that forward. And the goal for the influencers is exposure. It's credibility. They want to build their own brands. So if there's anything to take from this discussion today, it's that you as B2B players do not have to write a check to get influencers if you do it right. And that's a big kind of misnomer out there that we tend to see a gut reaction to. So wonderful metrics.
Let me add to some of that, Stephen. What we often find in the B2B space is that the key influencers often, there are various archetypes in each project that we do, right? There are a category of influencers who, because of their stature in the dialogue, need to be part of the discussion of big questions. Where is X going? What is the direction? What is happening with regard to the big landscape that this tool, technology, service plays in? And they have a brand that sort of involves market commentary and direction commentary. And so they want to be part of big conversations like that. Then there's a whole nother category of influencers, archetypes, who often make a living from the same people that you're trying to sell to. They already get consulting services, some dollars from these folks, and their role is often to advise and to provide insight on very specific pieces of the equation. And so they want to be part of the dialogue so that they can be seen to be knowledgeable about all the new things that are happening, right? So those are key parts of the equation. This Upside project was incredibly successful. The thing that we didn't describe was the fact that because of Upside scale, they didn't have resources to do PPC activity. So we actually got to do this controlled experiment with Upside where they weren't really doing much else type marketing. And the results of this influence program was sort of pure in the sense that it's all that they were doing at the time. Therefore, all the leads and all the activities that happened in that business at that point were very much linked to these programs. So, again, in the B2B world, we had the conversation a couple of months ago where we were talking to a BDC company, and they were like, 263? That's not a lot. The company had about 1,000 people that they were trying to go after in the whole market, in the geographic market they were targeting. So getting 263 of them to interact with you was a significant percentage of the market from just one exercise. And as Stephen said, we did a variety of other things with them after. Back to you, Stephen.
So and Robbie, you just really hit upon this again. I'll give this to Delph here. What are the impacts then of this against, again, broadly speaking, marketing of a B2B product or service, right? Where are the benefits and can they be measured?
Yes, and that's basically a report from 2020. Obviously, B2B has been evangelist in the past, so it's kind of not anything kind of new. It's a new way of actually building a discipline around it. And respondents in the B2B sector, marketers, basically said very efficient to kind of build brand awareness. Very efficient, it comes second to kind of generate leads. Brand reputation, obviously, brand advocacy, and then you can see, like, you can even gear it towards obviously sales, but also customer satisfaction, retention, improved reputation of key staff. That can also be with employee advocacy. So it has very tangible impact, and it's critical today for B2B companies to leverage influence marketing, for sure. And in particular, if it's complex technology, disruptive kind of companies, it's very, very important to get known by the experts.
Sorry, let me add something there, Delph. At the beginning, Adam was talking about the fact that a lot of what we're talking about is influence marketing affecting the early part of the funnel. Although that is clearly a place that influence plays very strongly, what we have found is that if you do it right, influence affects the whole flow of the funnel down to individual sales transactions. And so, designed right, these programs influence every step of the buyer journey. Sorry, back to you, Delph.
Yeah. Hey, I just wanted to say we've got about 15 minutes left, and I know you've got a healthcare example that you wanted to share. As you move into that, I actually want to make sure there's a really good question that came in from Stephen here. And so I want to kind of tee that question up so that as you go through the healthcare example, maybe you're sort of addressing it, because there may not be a lot of time left at the end. And that,
sure, let's dive into that. Absolutely, Adam.
Let me give you the question so that as you're going through this, maybe you're thinking about this and sort of addressing it. So the question was in the medical device and healthcare B2B, peer-to-peer education has been a very effective means of communicating among clinicians and the healthcare community. So the clinicians are basically doctors and other clinicians and are the influencers. And then one of the things that's happened in healthcare is that there's been a big emergence of digital health and therapeutics. So B2C has actually become more important, fun enough. Because a lot of these companies just try and directly influence the consumers, but in the process of doing that, these companies are actually neglecting a lot of the clinicians and other say more B2B influencers. So as you're going through that example, kind of think about how the clinician might play a part in the influence.
Let me actually address that question very specifically, and the way that we would deal with that situation is that Delph has described this concept of different archetypes, right? That every influence program we pull together for a client has different type of archetypes. In a situation where clinicians were an important part of the equation, you would identify a clinician archetype, and you would figure out who the influencers in that community are. And some of them may be clinicians, some of them may be people that influence clinicians, right? Some of them may be high profile medical figures who consumers listen to, right? So the process of identifying the correct archetypes will give you the answer to the question of who do you want to include in this process and how do you want to work with them to communicate these things to different constituents. Does that make sense, Adam?
Great. Yep.
Thanks.
Perfect.
Over to you, Stephen.
Yeah. So again, I think we hit upon this important, first step of listening. We call it a phase 0 internally. So something to take away here. So what we did was, with Adam's guidance, we got a series of really themes, topics, and specific keywords around the health tech space, and specifically around workforce management. So that segment as platform, as software, as a solution within your world. And we threw this through our tools to find out against US-based, fairly small window of time. I think we horizontally looked back, or longitudinally looked back into September last year up until present day, to find out against workforce management within health tech, what were the themes, the conversations that were happening out there in terms of weight and merit. And you can see here, again, this idea of a topic wheel. And there are very different segments here, right? You've got a segment just purely on the software, right? Who might be the buyer? Who might be the executive sponsor here? You've got a segment on nurses. We just hit upon that, Adam, right? So this kind of clinician to clinician, community, this is important for them. You've got more feature-based things. And I'm not an expert in workforce management. You all are, possibly. The platform as a communication tool, the platform as a scheduling tool. So a very interesting dynamic that's very wide, which points to the need for archetypes in different areas to find the influencers that might make sense. So that's a first step that we did, taking a snapshot. From that's going to reveal, and has, a series of influencers, and really authors, who are talking about this as a certain level of depth. So mentions, but also this idea of reach, kind of classic advertising metric around how many impressions does that audience get over time. And from that leads to, this idea of, oh, there's an influencer, but this happens to be a company. That's okay too. And this is a good kind of, delta between influencers who are individuals, but also influencers who are entities. That's also part of the mix. Again, this is different than PR, where you're paying for a byline or article or a post. They maybe want to be a part of your story. They may want to be a part of the ecosystem you're in and gain that exclusivity, gain that insight that only you have as a service. And then Delph, maybe talk about how that then leads to this.
Yes, and then obviously we start identifying influencers, right? Like John Lean, and it's really about the people that are influencing your potential customers, looking at who they're connected to, who are they influencing themselves, what do they care about the most. It's really kind of digging into it. All that process is really, getting back to customer centricity. Why are people saying? What is the market saying? To kind of make sure we participate in the conversation and educate, help sort out some problems for our audiences. So this John Lean, then we go on to an influence tool, and then we start digging, I think it's the next slide, Stephen, into who is that person. So this is the ease audience analysis for Twitter. So we can see straight away which market, the kind of occupation these people have, the age, the income, the brand they tend to talk about, their like and interest, the different network, the aggregation of the different networks as well. So we can really start digging, deep diving into that specific individual and understand how we can team up with him, which archetypes he'll be part of, and what is going to be of interest to him to team up with us. These people don't want to just promote a company. They're going to promote a company because this company has credibility in their eyes, and it's important to talk about them. So that's kind of where we're getting into specific individuals. And for a lot of our clients, that's really where it becomes real, because they see people they know that are part of the network. I think, Adam, you had mentioned something about John.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be with John next week. John does a lot of things, but he runs a niche health tech publication and it's a community actually called Healthcare Scene, but he also runs an organization called HITMIC, which is the Healthcare IT Marketing Conference. And so that's next week. So I've been, funny enough, I was like, oh, I know John, I've actually been emailing with him today.
Yeah, it's interesting how, again,
it's a small world, right?
Yeah, doing this listening effort, which can be, manual on your own through LinkedIn or through the network tools that are publicly available. Like, we ended up at the same place that Adam, you already know. So
I just want to build on that a bit, because one of the things that I've found by using this technique is that it's a little different from PR, because I think with PR, you're a PR specialist building a relationship with a journalist or a reporter, and it tends to be very much at arm's length. Like, there's, the majority of the reporters tend to be at an arm's length. I've found that actually that you become much more, these guys actually become friends. And I remember using this technique in building my software business. And there was a particular reporter who I wanted to get to know. And I found her through one of these, I think it's through Tracker actually. And I ran into her at a conference. And so rather than pitching her a story, I got to talking to her and get to understand more about what she was interested in. And over the course of several years, she wrote a number of stories about us. We took part in panels with her, and it became a sort of a much more meaningful relationship. And we were adding value to what she was doing, as opposed to just, hey, I'm pitching a story to you.
Yeah, and it's less about a control message, right? You're never going to control what an influencer is saying about you. Your influence, in working with the influencer, you're going to have to earn it.
Exactly, yeah.
Let me bring this sort of home. Just a point. One interesting stats on the previous slide for John Lynn was the number of followers that he had. Right, when in the B2B world, oftentimes as companies, we're trying to sell to hundreds, maybe thousands of customers globally, and that's it. Right, we're not in the B2C game per se, where you're trying to touch millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. You're trying to target a fairly defined set of folks, and I guess what we believe is when you really know who it is that you need to talk to get approval to buy your product or service, this approach can be incredibly effective, because you can laser in on exactly who the folks that are talking to your customers are. And this is where there's massive overlap with the ABM area that Adam spends a lot of time talking about. Those two techniques in conjunction are incredibly effective in trying to reach folks, far more than PPC, we believe. So what does it mean if you begin on this journey towards influence? Done right, it's something that you start very early on in the life of the business, because once you're thinking about influence as a way to bring the market to you, you begin to recognize that it's something that needs to be included and thought about in almost everything that you do, right? Customer success, right? When a customer is saying this part of the product isn't working for me, and probably not working for a whole bunch of other folks using this thing, a company that is based on influence listens to that. Again, if you want a perfect example of it, watch Elon Musk respond to a criticism or a comment that someone makes about the car. I hate the way the screen, you have to go 3 levels down to turn the headlights on. And then the next message he sends is, yep, you're right. And then the next one after that is, it'll be fixed in the next release. That's what putting influence at the center of your business means. It means that you're listening to your customers, you're taking feedback, and you are mapping it into everything that you do, and it touches everything. So, we believe that influence accelerates company and brand growth. We've got a lot of examples that illustrate that. We believe that influence is the most efficient use of your digital marketing budget, and it's not a marketing channel, right? The thing that organizations who are truly practicing this thing recognize is it's always on, and it's a community that will be there working with you and for you all the time. Again, not like PPC. The minute that PPC budget's gone, it's over. Influence as an activity resonates throughout the business for a very long period of time. So if you've gotten to a point where you think that this might be something that might help your organization, what could you do to begin with today, right? So generally there's three things that we encourage organizations to explore. The first is listening, right? What conversations do we really need to be part of? You know, we've been into many firms that say, hey, we've been doing a bit of this and we've got 100% share of voice in this area. And then we do some analysis and it turns out they've got 100% share of voice of a topic that the only people that care about it is that company. That's not what the market's talking about. The market is talking about this. So listening to the market and understanding what conversations you need to be a part of is a very important part of the equation, right? Who's talking? Where are they talking? How loud are they? Do they say things their audience agree with, or do they, every time they say something, their audience goes, no, we don't agree with that, right? So that listening is a very important part of the equation. Confluence, Delph touched on this, right? Making sure that your content strategy is integrated with influence participation. You know, it's one thing for you to say, my product is great. When an influencer who has huge credibility and is known by the market to really know this area and this topic says, this is a good product, you should really look at this, that's confluence at work, right? And then lastly, you know, influence relationship management. Influence relationships are always on, and that means you have to invest in them continually. It's not you chat with them once, you do a campaign, and then you don't talk to them again, or you don't talk to them again for another few years. These are relationships that are nurtured, and as such, what we often find in B2B companies is that these relationships are often owned by senior executives within the business, right? So senior executives get involved in these activities, and that's something to be aware of, right? It's not something that can be truly delegated down, right? Absolutely, that some of the transactional stuff, some of the logistics stuff, some of the operational things can be delegated down, but a lot of the key interactions are done by senior members of an organization in a B2B firm.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Robbie, Delphine, and Steve. It's very insightful, very detailed too, which I really appreciated. We are actually at time, but if there are, you know, if there are any additional questions than the ones that we'd answered, maybe we could stay on for a couple more minutes. And so I'll give it any other questions. No, I think you've done a really thorough job here. So with that, I want to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank Robbie, Delphine, and Steve for their presentation. I just want to let everybody know that I will be sharing a recording of this over the next week. If you're looking for it and you don't see it, I promise I will send it out sometime in the next week. Anyway, with that, I wish you all a happy Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you, and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.